Hi everyone, my name's Julia and I'm an educator at the Columbia River Maritime Museum. In light of all of these updates about COVID-19, the Education Department has decided to start posting online Ed Talks to help bring the museum's programming to you. Today's Ed Talk is all about Shanghaiing. Shanghaiing is the act of forcing someone into becoming a sailor by kidnapping, threatening, or tricking them in some way. The British Navy actually had a legal version of this called impressment, or press ganging, which is when the Navy would kidnap able-bodied men to work on their ships for them. This was an especially big problem in the early days of the US, when the Navy would also try to kidnap American sailors. The vigilante version of impressment, or Shanghaiing, is said to have developed as early as the 17th century. The term Shanghaiing probably got its name because ships carrying abducted sailors were normally bound for Shanghai. The people who Shanghaied were known as crimps, boarding house masters, shipping masters, and land sharks. Shanghaiing happened all over the world, but some of the top ports for this practice on the West Coast were San Francisco, Portland, and Astoria. The growth of maritime commerce on the Columbia River during the 1800s made Portland and Astoria ideal places for people to set up boarding houses to Shanghai sailors. There were a few key players in the Portland and Astoria Shanghaiing scene, and one of them was James Turk, who ran several Shanghaiing businesses in Portland and Astoria with his wife, Catherine, and son, Charles. The Turks originally had their business in San Francisco, but had to leave town after James Turk got involved in a murder scandal. The Turks moved back and forth between Portland and San Francisco for a few years, and then in the 1870s, Turk and his son Charles set up a boarding house in Astoria. It's said that Turk made a habit out of Shanghaiing his own son, not just once, but many times, since the two of them were in on it together. After Charles had been Shanghaied and the blood money had been collected, he would jump ship and head back to shore, where he would meet up with his dad and get his share of the money. Joe Bunco Kelly and his brother William were runners who often worked back and forth between Portland and Astoria. Bunco Kelly is infamous in the Shanghaiing world, and while his most famous story is probably a myth, it's still a fun one to tell. The story goes that about 20 or so men broke into an undertaker's office in Portland, thinking that it was a saloon. They convinced themselves that bottles of embalming fluid were actually some type of exotic liquor, and they quite literally drank themselves to death. Seeing a financial opportunity, Bunco Kelly and a few others loaded up their bodies onto a ship to be Shanghaied for $50 a head. It wasn't until the next day that the captain realized his crew was in the early stages of rigor mortis. There were also female crimps in Portland and Astoria, and this particular woman managed to escape almost every punishment and was hailed as a pioneer resident when she died. Bridget Grant moved to the Northwest from Massachusetts with her husband and 8 children. After arriving in Astoria, she and her family set up a successful boarding house near the waterfront. It's rumored that at one point in the relationship, Bridget actually arranged for her own husband to be Shanghaied. As methods of Shanghaiing became more and more violent, congressmen in the Northwest started to draft legislation to put a stop to it. Many historians believed the legislation was a conspiracy put on by Portland to hurt their Shanghaiing businesses. But with or without legislation, there just wasn't as much of a need for crimping by the early 1900s. And by the time the US was thinking about World War I, the world of Shanghaiing had come to a close. That's all from me about Shanghaiing. We hope to see you again for the Columbia River Maritime Museum's online Ed Talks. Thanks for watching.